In these perilous times, see from current events how biblical prophecy is coming to pass in front of our eyes. You're watching In the Last Days, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. With Martin and Natalie Blackham, thank you to our friends and partners who make this program possible. Now, here's Martin and Natalie.
Hi, welcome to the In the Last Days television program with myself, Martin Blackham. Natalie is behind the scenes today and she says hello. We welcome you wherever you're watching. We've been having a great time with our new friend Walter Bingham from Arutz Sheva Radio, talking about the conditions in Europe before World War II. And you know, the exciting thing is that Walter actually saw it with his own eyes, that you can read it in a book or learn about history, but to have an eyewitness to history is so important for the people, and that we can learn from history. And you know, in the days that we're living in, with all the revolution that's happening around us in the Arab countries, how important that we learn the lessons of history. Now, we just got up to Kristallnacht, Walter. We were talking about, you were an eyewitness to the events of that day, and the leading up to it, the man who went into the consulate and shot the
third secretary, and then of course it was a planned pogrom. And you were also saying about the difficulties of movement inside Germany before Kristallnacht. Well, let me just complete this story about Kristallnacht. I was in this other town where I was at school, otherwise I would have gone away with the deportation of Polish Jews, which we spoke about earlier. I lived in an orphanage because I had to eat kosher, and that was the only kosher place. And so I walked from there to the school every day. The school was behind the synagogue. On that day, I went as well, and I saw that already on the way there was commotion. And when I got there, I saw what was happening. So I couldn't get very far, but I saw that inside the synagogue was being burned. And of course, they burned all, as I mentioned, all the synagogues in any parts of the world where the Germans were. That was Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia. They damaged or looted 3,500 shops. 30,000 men were taken, and that was what happened in Kristallnacht. Now they damaged the synagogues. I want to show you. Well, you can see that these were the two main synagogues in the town, rather cathedral-like, big places, and this one is when it was after it was destroyed. Now, you see that one of the synagogues still had some outer walls standing, which was deemed to be a dangerous structure. And to add insult to injury, the Nazis made the Jews pay for the demolition of what was left. It's actually unbelievable. And so that was what happened.
So when the synagogue, you saw it, did you hear that it was burning down, or you saw it?
Well, not in my town.
Mm-hmm.
Those pictures were from the town which I left to go to school elsewhere, but right. I saw it in another town.
Okay.
I didn't get very close to it afterwards, because I wanted to get home. Mm-hmm. I was frightened. And on the occasion before, a few days before, when they took my father, which we heard in the earlier program, I contacted my mother. I said, I want to come home. She said, stay where you are, boy. She said, because they just took your father. So I stayed. But after this Kristallnacht, I contacted my mother again. I said, I want to come home. She said, come. And you know, when you get older, your short-term memory goes. And if you ask me, what did you have for lunch yesterday? I have a job to remember it. And you know, I went on the 322 diesel train from Mannheim, the town in which I was, to my hometown. And I remember that trip and that time of the train. And I'd never written it down. So then I came home.
Now, Walter, you understand that your father eventually ended up at the Warsaw Ghetto, and I know that you've got some information about some of the conditions there, including the food that people are allowed.
Well, you know that a normal man, a grown man, needs about 2,500 or so calories to live a day. Well, the Germans in the Warsaw Ghetto, as you see here, they got 2,613. That was very good. And the Polish population, 699. And the Jews, 184. Well, that's probably was colored water from potato peels or something, I imagine. You can't really live on that. But of course, in the ghetto, they could trade a little. There was a way to exist a little. But then in 1941, in the summer of 1941, was very, very hot. Great heat wave. And every epidemic you can think of broke out. I mean, typhoid and cholera and all the things that we dread broke out. And they died like flies. And my father was already weak, was among them. I have a photo here of my father where you can see that the collar of his shirt, they had photographers there or something, I don't know, they did a bit of trade, and he sent this picture back, that the collar of his shirt was several sizes too large. Now, he wouldn't buy a shirt like that, but his neck shrunk, you see. And then, of course, he was among those who died.
With the malnourishment, they weren't able to...
And of course, he fell. There was someone who came back, as I mentioned, came back from there, and he perished in the Warsaw Ghetto.
He wasn't able to send letters out of the Warsaw
Well,
Ghetto?
they did send. There was correspondence from there, and they wrote when they could on postcards, because in Germany they had a system where you could send a postcard with another one hanging on it, and the other one hanging on it was prepaid, and you would use the prepaid postcard to reply, or they had little reply vouchers and so on. And when they wrote from there, they wanted to tell the story, but it wasn't possible because it was censored, and it wasn't possible really. So they used code. They would say, my friend Carl has gone on holiday, which meant he was deported or he died. In all kinds of, we understood, we were tuned in to that kind of language, and they gave messages that way of what happened. I was a member of the Zionist youth movement. I always, from my mid-teens, I would have liked to go to Palestine in a kibbutz and so on. I even went on a camp to train for agriculture for 4 weeks near Hamburg, and it didn't come. Well, it was British mandate, and I'm afraid that some British listeners might not like this, but the British government of the time could have done a lot more to save a lot more Jews, because they certainly didn't let them come to Palestine, because they were sitting on the fence here. There was oil involved, much like today, and difficulties between the Arabs and Jews.
And there've been riots, haven't there, in Hebron?
In 1929, there were riots in Hebron where they died, where they killed 60 odd people, 63, I think. And it was very, very difficult. The British were very tough, which of course made some of the Jews form underground militias. And there's another story we haven't got time to go into now. And but the British could have allowed many Jews into Palestine. Was it Mark Twain who traveled the country and found hardly anybody living there, with plenty of room? And also, they could have allowed people into England. They didn't. It was very, very tough. You had to have a lot of money to deposit, rather like the Americans. The English were not alone. It was the Americans too. You had to have funds so that you were not a drain on the economy. Well, look at the countries today. They're taking in lots of people from all over the world who are indeed a drain on the economy. Jews, Western educated Jews, wouldn't have been. In the end, under great pressure, they allowed 10,000 children to come to England, unaccompanied, no parents. And in every town there was someone who played God to decide who would go, and I was very fortunate to have been among those who were chosen to come on what was collectively called Kindertransport. It was a very collective name because lots of organizations had an input. Some children went to family, some went to foster parents, some went into hostels, some, like me, went into kibbutz-like establishments. And on a particular day, I was going to England. My mother took me to the railway station. Now, I was an only child. You know, you need to imagine what it's like for a mother who had one child sending this boy, 15 and a half, that's all, into another country, to England. I thought I knew to speak English, and she only knew that I was going to England. Didn't know where, didn't know what. Most children of the Kindertransport never saw their parents again. I was very fortunate, and maybe we come to that after the war, my mother, who survived the camps, and I met her again, and we were reunited. But the heroes of this Kindertransport were the parents, the mother. The train pulled out, and the mother waved goodbye, and the children cried a little. But you know, afterwards, the children there was an element of adventure also for children, an element of adventure. I mean, you went on a big train, never been on such a big train before, and you went through other countries, and then eventually you went on a boat. Oh, I must tell you, you know, we had in Germany only this black bread, and we used to dark bread. They now bake that kind of stuff again here. But and then I came on the boat from Hoek van Holland to Harwich, and it was a night journey. In the morning we had breakfast, and I said, "Excuse me, I don't eat cake for breakfast." It was white sliced bread. I'd never seen it in my life. Ordinary white sliced bread. That will hopefully be the title of a book I shall one day finish. I don't eat. I thought it was cake.
And this was the English breakfast?
That was the English breakfast, yes, on the boat. I thought it was cake. Anyway, so the children were traveling, and I arrived in the county of in Harwich, and then went to a farm in the county of Kent in England, Great Engine Farm in Woodchurch near Ashford in Kent, I think. And there I stayed and lived in some railway wagons for a month, and then we went to North Wales, into a dilapidated old castle called Grich Castle. It was really dilapidated, and that's where I stayed several years. And initially there was correspondence with Germany, because before the United States entered the war, you could write to the United States, and the United States would send a letter to Germany. So I had contact until the United States entered in the war. We left a lot of things out, believe me. The story, time constraints here, the story is a very, very long one. You know, my mother had hoped to come to England. She was registered to come as a domestic to England. And eventually, I don't think that was very smart of her, dear mother, that she wanted a job where she could take her son with her into the family. Well, I believe she should have gone to any job, and we'll sort out the son later, once I was in England. And eventually there was someone in London who was a Jewish woman who was prepared to take her and send the papers for her, where I could also be. And the British bureaucracy moved very slowly. They weren't all that keen, as I said before. And before the whole thing was completed and she could come to England, the war broke out, and that was it, finished. And so I was, with all the others, hoping that after the war I should see my parents. Well, of course, as you know, my father perished, and my mother survived. And eventually I saw her after the war. I lived in England and I worked and did all kinds.
So you now had another language to learn.
Yeah, well, when I was in Kent, in that farm, they asked, who can speak English? And I raised my hand, and we were sent to buy some pots. And I went to the local ironmonger. I don't remember if it was in the village or in Ashford. And I went in there and with another girl who also thought she could speak. And the man didn't really know what I was talking about, didn't understand me. That was my knowledge of English. It was very different when you learn something at school for a little while and then you need to put it into practice.
And you eventually ended up in the British Army.
And yes, well, that's very interesting. I was a Pole. My parents got a passport that was valid for a month. Or my mother or my father, I don't know, they arranged it. And I came to England as a Pole. So I was a friendly alien. Now, all Germans and Austrians were interned under Regulation 18b, same regulation under which they interned Sir Oswald Mosley and his family, the fascist leader in the UK. And one day, on this alien's registration book, the sticker on the back was printed in black. If it printed in red, you're an enemy alien. If it's printed in black, you're a friendly alien. Now, Germans were enemy aliens, and they were all, as I said, interned. One day I was working in the fields below the castle, and I saw black Humber cars, which were the police cars of the old days with the bells in the front, driving up the stately drive, and eventually a runner came down from the office and mentioned different names of boys and girls. No, I'm not sure if the girls were included, but definitely the boys who were asked to come to the office. I never saw them again. And they were German nationals, my friends. I was a friendly alien because I was a Pole, and they happened to have a different passport. They were enemies, and they were interned. Some sent to oh yeah, women as well, that's right. Some sent to Australia, one came back as a pilot officer, and some to Canada, and women went to the Isle of Man and were interned there, incidentally, a place where my future wife spent 18 months. And yeah, then because I was a Pole, I was one day received call-up papers for the Polish army. Well, I couldn't speak Polish. I'd never been. I was flabbergasted. So I went to the Polish consulate or embassy or wherever this thing came from, and I said, look, I got these papers. I don't want to go in the Polish army. I know nothing about Poland. And anyway, you anti-Semites, I don't want to. And if the sergeant says turn left, I would turn right. They said, we'll see what can be done. And eventually they said, well, then the British said, if you can get a release from the Poles, you can join the British Army. I did get a release from the Polish Army, and I joined the British Army. And I trained for 6 weeks with the Royal West Kents in Maidstone barracks, and after that I was posted to the Royal Army Service Corps, which is drivers, and I drove all kinds of things. Oh, I drove, eventually I drove ducks, DUK, I forget what it stands for. They were the big ships with wheels and propellers, like trucks with wheels and propellers. And we was when eventually we would go abroad and land somewhere, we would unload the ships from and come on land. So you swim in the water, 5 knots, that was all, and then you could drive on land. You could inflate and deflate the tires to get better grip, and etc. Well, I thought that was what I was going to do, but they were very large, and you had about 6 or 7 feet in front of the front wheel, so it was difficult to turn the corners. Quite a skill. One day, on parade in the army, the sergeant, and you know in the army you must never volunteer. That's fatal. Never volunteer for anything. Well, they called out, they wanted drivers for ambulances. So my wheel started turning, unfortunately. And I thought, well, I get a Red Cross, and that'll be much safer than, because we'd be sitting at 5 knots in the water, and the German aircraft will come and bomb us out of the water. So I'd be better off driving an ambulance with a Red Cross. Biggest mistake I ever made in the army, of course. In the invasion of Europe, in which I took part in Normandy, there were no German aircraft. They had quite a normal time doing the job, eventually on the canals of Holland and Belgium, and had a good time. And I was sitting in the front line, in front of the front line almost, with my 2-stretcher Hamburg ambulance. And fought there, and that was very difficult. I was involved in great battles. I didn't used to in the old days tell this story, but now that I'm getting into the last quarter of my life, I'll tell you that I received a very high decoration from the British Army, from the King, a military medal which entitles me to carry those 2 letters behind my name, because, and I haven't got the citation here, unfortunately, I should have brought it. I worked for 3 days and 3 nights evacuating wounded. There were terrible scenes in front of the infantry front line, an anti-tank regiment that got destroyed, and my ambulance was shot up. My ambulance orderly was severely wounded, and I crawled back in the way I was taught, a special way of crawling back so that they can't take aim. You crawl back and you crawl to another place, you get up, you run, you crawl to another place so that they couldn't, because we were under mortar and machine gun fire, and got another ambulance and secured some of the wounded. And so they awarded me for that, but the whole unit did its job, of course, and I took that as a thing for the unit. But people looked at me, the members of the army thought this Jew with a foreign accent, which I actually covered up with Cockney slang and expletives, they didn't like it that I had the medal, but that was it. So, and eventually I agitated. I said, look, I speak German, perfect German, and we are going into Germany. You need people who can speak German. Anybody can be trained to drive an ambulance. There was a skill in ambulances because you needed to take care of the wounded. It shouldn't have too many bumps and so on. I said, look, and no, the units did not want to release us because they were under strength. People died, people were killed. And eventually I'd managed that.
And we're going to have to do some more programs because we've run out of time again, Walter. It's been great to be with you, and having our special guest Walter Bingham, veteran journalist with Arutz Sheva, Israel National Radio, Channel 7. You can contact Walter at israelnationalradio.com. Great to be with you today, and remember, we're living in the last days.
You've been watching In the Last Days, a TV program with Martin and Natalie Blackham, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. If you would like to financially support the program or find out about conferences, meetings or ministry products, then please contact us with the details on your screen. Visit our easy-to-use website at www.inthelastdays.com and register for our free e-newsletter. Get the latest news from Israel, product information, online video teaching, or watch today's TV program at a time that's convenient to you. Thank you again, friends and partners, for making this program possible.